Hello, friends. I got my Roku up in the ceiling. I got some interesting books. Let's see if I can find that video. Let's see. Let's go. Let's see what I got here. I want to go to YouTube.
Today he will be speaking on the topic knowing and becoming. No,
knowing and being.
Knowing and being. Knowing and being.
Knowing and being.
After this,
Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real, lead us from darkness unto light, lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good evening and namaskar, everybody. My pranams to revered Swami Saravapriyananda Maharaj, pranams to the revered monks and matajis, and namaskars to all of you, dear friends. So we are gathered again here with a very important subject. I mean, I always say it's an important subject, but this is really important because knowing and being, I think this, in Vedanta, we inevitably come to this point. This question I've heard again and again, that I now get it, I've heard the teachings, I now understand it, but there's how do I make it real? How do I embody it in my life? How do I take the what do you call it? Americanism is there when the rubber hits the road. Yeah. How do I walk the talk? And that's the subject, knowing and being. And the more I think about it, the more it becomes, very soon this becomes the central, the central question in our spiritual life. So that's why I think it's very important to discuss this. I'll just say what I've been thinking about the last few days about this subject, and then we can have a little bit of Q&A depending on the time available. I know many people here and in other places have asked this very same question. It all boils down to this question of knowing and being. And they've asked this question in so many different ways, but basically it's this question. Eliot, T.S. Eliot, one of his most famous poems is The Hollow Men, and not the Wasteland, The Hollow Men. And at the end of that poem, he says, between the idea and the reality falls the shadow. Between the intention and the act, between the idea and the reality falls the shadow. Thousands of years before Eliot, in the Mahabharata, we find Krishna going to teach his, giving his teachings, his counsel. Before he did it for Arjuna, his disciple, it's the famous Bhagavad Gita. Before that, he actually goes to the villain of the piece, of the epic, Duryodhana, the evil prince, and tries to reform him and says, "Oh prince, what you are doing, it is not dharma, it is not righteous. What you are doing is adharma, it is unrighteous." And then Duryodhana's answer, it prefigures what Eliot was talking about. Duryodhana says to Krishna, "Oh Krishna, do not teach me about right and wrong." Why? Because I know what is right and I know what is wrong. And I know what I'm doing is not right. That's not my problem. I know. It's not that I do not know. I know. I understand. I understand what I'm doing is wrong. Right? That's really honest for a villain, so-called villain, to have so much introspection. But that's the human condition. He says, I know what I'm doing is wrong. I know what is right. You don't have to teach me right and wrong. I know that. That's not my problem. Then what is your problem? My problem is, I know what's right. I don't feel like doing it. I know what's wrong. I can't stop myself from doing it. Why not? There's some force in my heart which propels me along in this way, and I'm helpless. This is the way I am. So that is the human condition. That is the gap between knowing and being. Duryodhana knows, and yet it's difficult for him to be. Again, from Mahabharata, we come back to the present age here in the United States. There is a very well-known psychologist, Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, I don't know exactly how you pronounce it. I read one of his books, one of his early books. It's very, very well known, The Happiness Hypothesis. There he takes up this question that why is it so difficult to change? We know what we want to be, but why aren't we able to do it? We are convinced, but we aren't able to do it. He says there's this whole huge literature now. You go to Barnes and Noble, and you see there'll be a huge self-help, positive psychology, self-improvement section. Books from all sorts of books, how to be happier, how to communicate better, how to lose weight, how to make friends, and how to focus, how to... so much. Some of it is anecdotal, some of it is, sort of homespun, but quite a bit of it, increasingly these days, is academically rigorous. There is a whole subject now called positive psychology, which deals with human strengths, not with human weaknesses, but human strengths, happiness, resilience, sociability, all sorts of things which constitute human strengths. And yet Jonathan Haidt poses this question: why is this gap between knowing and being? He poses this question. The self-help sections, if you see Barnes and Nobles, it must be one of the most popular sections, because those sections are huge, rows and rows of books, which means millions and millions of copies sell. And yet, after reading a lot of that, after getting your own self-help, self-improvement library, almost inevitably one feels a little let down. That, I know such a lot, but the improvement to my life is at most a little incremental, a little bit, not much. Why? What is this gap between knowing, you buy all the books, listen to all the talks, and then being? There's still a gap. And the more you know, the more the gap increases between knowing and being. I know so many techniques, so many ancient, the wisdom of the entire world. 5,000 years of spiritual wisdom developed mostly in India, but also in other parts of the East, has now been poured into America, and through America across the world now. It's a global phenomenon, spirituality. How much difference is it making? It's making a difference to people's lives, no doubt about it. But how much? Why are we not at all satisfied with the progress that we are making? We are not at all satisfied. We don't know if it's making a difference or not. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But as far as we can see our own lives, we don't feel satisfied. We think we ought to be much better, much further along the road than we actually find ourselves to be. So this is the problem.
So, knowing and being. Should I look it up? Martin Heidegger. Well, he may have written a book with the word being in it. What does Martin Heidegger mean by being? The concept of being was central to Martin Heidegger's philosophy. The term being is of singular importance for Heidegger's philosophy, but what does it really mean? How is the concept of being with a capital B any different from that of being with a lowercase? We offer a brief introduction to Heidegger's concept of being, a sketch of Heidegger's life and career before trying to explain the central question of his most important work, being and time, namely, what is the meaning of being? So Martin Heidegger was one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century. After studying theology at the University of Freiburg, he then studied philosophy. He was greatly influenced by Edmund Husserl's phenomenological approach to philosophy, which attempted to understand our efforts to comprehend things by way of a reduction to the most basic elements of subjectivity, and also emphasized the role of intention in how we come to understand things. So at the very start of being and time, which remains the work for which Heidegger is best known. Okay. Can you read it? At the very start of being and time, which remains the work for which Heidegger is best known, and on which most interpretations of his philosophy as a whole are disproportionately based, he posed the question, what is the meaning of being? With a capital B. He also observes that this is not a question that we are naturally called to ask, in the sense that we are not disturbed or dismayed by a lack of understanding of being. And so the terms of the question, its ground, needs to be explored. In other words, this is the question, and Heidegger wants to answer it and justify it as a question worth answering. So what is being? Being with a capital B. Let's see. So, firstly, we should be careful to note the capitalization. There we go. Can you read it? Read it better. So, Heidegger's definition of being hinges on a contrast with being, lowercase b. Secondly, we should be careful not to take the capitalization of the B in being as the creation of a proper name, as with the capitalization of the G in God. Being is not some particular thing, those are beings. So, having cleared that up, some context is useful. Heidegger can be seen as working within the phenomenological tradition of Edmund Husserl, who was a great influence on Heidegger and to whom being and time was... Oh, I was trying to scroll my phone to make it go up, but the phone that I'm using to record the video, but that didn't work too well. So, what is phenomenology? Phenomenology can be defined in various ways, but part of the project was to do with attempting to do something which philosophers since Immanuel Kant had felt themselves unable to do. That was to speak of things in themselves rather than things mediated or structured by our facilities. Than things so phenomenology can be defined in various ways, but part of the project was to do with attempting to do something which philosophers since Immanuel Kant had felt themselves unable to do. That was to speak of things in themselves rather than things mediated or structured by our faculties. Heidegger encapsulates this idea quite well with his famous slogan, "Back to the things themselves." Okay, ontological difference. There's Martin Heidegger. So, the idea of being will be described in some works following Being and Time as ontological difference. Again, we're having to paraphrase and therefore speak approximately. But it seems right to say that ontological in this context is to be understood in context with the ontical? Is that right? Ontical. What is the ontical? The ontical difference refers to the difference between different kinds of entities, whereas ontological difference, which serves to examine the status of things as things which exist, rather than in contradistinction to other things. The simplest way to understand Heidegger's project here is to say that he is attempting to ask, what does it mean for something to exist at all? That question has to be understood in terms of the various resonances of meaning. First, what is it for something to exist? Second, what is the significance of things existing at all? What are the wider implications for philosophy that this is possible? But both are in play here because Heidegger wants us to think hard, both about the conditions of existence in theory and practice, and about the significance of those implications for philosophy as a whole. Heidegger was exceptionally conscious about his place in a wider philosophical tradition and wanted his work to represent a real break from what had preceded him in that canon. So, what did I get out of this? Well, not much. But there's hope. There is the structural depths of Indian thought that might give us a clue. The title of this book is Structural Depths of Indian Thought. Structural Depths of Indian Thought by P.T. Raju. Let's see. Structural Depths of Indian Thought by P.T. Raju. Sunni. That means that's the name of the publisher, but isn't that a university also? SUNY in New York State. Let's see. Let's see what this book is about. Let's see. How many pages does it have? Oh man, this is a thick book, isn't it? It must be difficult. 580 some pages with bibliography. It's got a section on Buddhism, which has got the bibliography for it. There's people like D.T. Suzuki and Rhys Davids. That would be C.A.F. Rhys Davids. The Manual of Buddhism. A Manual of Buddhism by Rhys Davids, 1932. Wow. Edward Conze, Buddhism, Its Essence and Development. Rhys Davids, Rhys, R-H-Y-S, Davids, Buddhist Psychologist, Ethics, 1923, 1912. There's some old books that were referenced there, I'd say. Just on the section on Buddhism. So, let's see. I sometimes like to read the foreword or the introduction. See, get an idea of what they're or the preface. Let's see, the preface. Special features of this book. The present work is of a new type. Whoa. Oh, I can't read it. Oh. There. But now I can't focus. I can't seem to focus on it. What's going on? I can't seem to focus. Isn't it automatic? I don't know. Let's see if I can read it. I'm having a hard time focusing. No, it's better focused if I put it real big. Real zooming in, I think. that I can't fit the whole book in there. I'm having a hard time. The letter is so small, I guess. I can't read it. The present work is of a new type. It is said that history is the science of the Germans and economics is that of the British. Whatever truth lies or does not lie in this generalization, the German historians of philosophy, particularly J.E. Erdmann and W. Windelband, impressed me so much that I began thinking that to teach Indian philosophy as philosophy, not merely as an accidental, intellectual, incidental addition to some religious practices and dogmas, one had to write it as the Germans had done, i.e., as a critical and constructive exposition of what? Of thought, struggling to be systematic and comprehensive. Indeed, no writer on Indian philosophy ought justifiably to ignore its major aim to be a philosophy of life and of the spirit. But it should not be meant that he should treat the intellectual content as trivial and indifferent. So, what is he saying here? I think he's saying that we should remember that this philosophy, it tries to be a philosophy of life, sort of like Stoicism is such a philosophy of life, or of trying to live the good life, you could say. Well, he's saying other things too. Talks about that. I guess he's impressed in the way Germans do well in writing about philosophy. In particular, these authors, J.E. Erdmann and W. Windelband. And so who is this writer of the preface? The preface is quite long. I see. And then there's an introduction. Maybe we should skip the preface and go to the introduction. Worcester, Ohio, P.T. Raju. Yep. I guess he wrote the preface and also the book. So the preface, I suppose, is always, or should always be, written by the author himself. I would think. Wouldn't you? So, can you read the introduction? Let's see. It looks like it fits more or less. So, the meaning of Indian philosophy. So, the term Indian philosophy means all philosophy developed at one time or another in the country called India. Or, well, let me interject here and say in the Indian subcontinent. by people who claimed Indian heritage. It includes the thought of men, men, who belong to areas lying outside what has been called India since 1947. That would be Pakistan and even Afghanistan. But even much earlier, between the 20th and 15th centuries BC, the Aryans who entered India from outside, maybe from the Arctic regions, brought with them the accumulated wisdom of their ancestors. The early Indian Aryans were perhaps the kith and kin and even ancestors of the Aryans who stayed back in Assyria, Iran, and Afghanistan and other places. Then some, at least, of the origins of Indian thought were non-Indian in the geographical sense. But whatever may be said of the remote regions, we may say that roughly all thought developed and funded between Persia on the west and Burma on the east and China and Tibet on the north and Ceylon on the south may be called Indian philosophy. Yay! Okay, so I think he's trying to say that we may want to consider the Buddhism that went from India into Tibet and China and so forth, and Ceylon and Burma and other, and even Hinduisms that went to, like, I don't know, Cambodia, Bali, Thailand. There's a little bit of Hinduism in those areas. Yeah, so all those areas, they preserved Indian philosophy, I suppose, and culture, and maybe they added to it. So maybe Indian philosophy could be extended to places that are now no longer considered the country of India. Like Pakistan is no longer the country of India, and Afghanistan is no longer. Maybe at one time Afghanistan was part of India. Well, there's certainly a flourishing of Buddhism in Afghanistan. So Indian philosophy should not be equated to the philosophy of Hindu religion. That's another point to consider, because there is also a Buddhist religion and Jain religion. Okay, the atheistic and materialistic school of the Charvakas is part of Indian philosophy, but can hardly be called a religion, as it does not believe in the reality of the soul, God, or any existence beyond. Or could it be called a religion? Whatever it could be called, I don't know if it's still in existence, that school of thought, the Charvakas, or Sarvakas, or Karvakas, however you pronounce it. It's C with an overlined A, not underlined, overlined, or a long A. C A. I'll skip saying the overline. So it's C-A-R-V as in Victor, A-K-A-S. And if I'm going to take a guess that C is pronounced like cha, so it's Charvakas, or it might be pronounced Sarvakas, and not Karvakas. So I'm taking an educated guess. The atheistic, I may be wrong, the atheistic and materialistic school of the Charvakas is part of Indian philosophy, but can hardly be called a religion, as it does not believe in the reality of the soul, God, or any existence beyond. Unless, let me interject and say that unless maybe you could call atheism a kind of religion. Neither is the word Hindu found in any ancient sacred book of India. Oh, yeah, the word Hindu is a fairly new invention, probably invented by the Europeans. The Indian Aryans called their religion Arya Dharma, or the Aryan way of life. And the pre-Buddhist Aryans called it the Vedic way of life, Vaidika Dharma. Also, as the Veda was their as the Veda was their sacred scripture. Oh, the pre-Buddhist Aryans, that means the people in India that decided to call themselves Aryans, that is the noble ones. Before Buddhism, they called their religion the Vedic way of life, the Vaidika Dharma, in addition to calling it the Arya Dharma. Oh yeah. The Vaidika Dharma, that Vaidika refers to the Veda. Okay. Though Veda, what does Veda mean? Oh, Veda means science or knowledge. The word Hindu is a corrupted form of the word Sindhu, which is the name of the river now called the Indus. Oh, sorry. Can you read it? Oh boy. Maybe I have to make it smaller, so. But I don't know. It doesn't focus very well, does it? Or does it? Can you read it? Well, I'll read it for you. So the word Hindu is a corrupted form of the word Sindhu, which is the name of the river now called the Indus River. Maybe it used to be called Sindhu. So the people that lived around the Sindhu River would end up being called Sindhu or Hindu. It is still called the Sindhu in Indian languages. If it's still around, it's probably drying up. I don't know. There was a river that completely dried up and its civilization disappeared. That would be where Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, the ruins are now existent. It is like deserted. The Iranians and the Greeks pronounced the letter S as H. So the Iranians and the Greeks pronounced the letter S as H. Oh, maybe that's Hindu, Shindu, Hindu, Hindu, Shindu, Hindu, Shindu. I'm trying to see how they could have evolved, or how one became the other. Maybe it was Sindhu, and then little by little, Sindhu, it became Shindu, Hindu, because the Greeks started pronouncing the S in Sindhu like Hindu, like H. That was the Iranian and Greeks' fault. And, okay, so the word does not occur in ancient Sanskrit lexicon. So you wouldn't find the word Sindhu or Hindu in even the Sanskrit lexicons. What are lexicons? Literature, maybe? In ancient Sanskrit lexicons. But later, after the Iranians and the Afghans became Muslims and came to settle down in India, all those who were not Muslims came to be called Hindus. The Buddhists and Jainas considered their religions reform movements as the Aryan way, and rejected the Vedic way, as they did not accept the Veda as their sacred scripture. But to foreigners, the Buddhists and Jainas are still Hindus in a general sense. There is a vacillation between identifying Hinduism with every religion born in India, and with a part of what is and with a part of what is born in India, but distinguished from Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and a few minor religions. Okay, so there is vacillation. So some people say, oh, Hinduism is just all the religions from India. But some people say, no, we want to keep Hindus to be distinguished from Buddhists, Jainists, Sikhists, and all the others that are not Hindus. The difficulty in fixing, reading the bottom of the page, the difficulty in fixing the meaning of Hinduism is due to its not having well-defined fixed denominational content when it was first used. It meant to the early Iranians and Greeks something that is to be found on the banks of the river Sindus, which I guess they dropped the S and the H sound and just made it sound like Indus. and beyond, but we know not what. So for a critical appreciation of Indian thought, the above unsolved and insoluble difficulty has to be kept in mind. The word India itself is derived from the mispronounced word Sindhu. But for some reason or other, itself is derived from the but for some reason or other has come to stay. In any case, Indian philosophy includes all philosophies born and developed in India, whatever be their remote and proximate seeds. So, that's how it's going to be in this book. Take it or leave it. So there's history in this Indian philosophy to keep in mind. What is the history of Indian philosophy? Although India had several schools and systems of philosophy, they do not form a historical or chronological series. Oh no, I like having chronological series. The history of Western philosophy generally presents one school or system appearing after another in time, although there are several appearing simultaneously also. We find also that later Western philosophies can be developments of the earlier ones. So respect for a school or tradition is far less in the West than in India. Every individual philosopher in the West tends to give a new name to his system and to distinguish it from that of his own teachers. Even if he has not done so, the historians of philosophy do so. So the history of Western philosophy can therefore be made to appear like a chronology of doctrines in schools, although they can be presented, if one likes, as detailed articulations of traditions started by the Greek philosophers. To distinguish it from Indian philosophies, which will be discussed next. The schools with a capital, no, not capital, but with a S at the end for plural. So there are schools, many schools of Indian thought. Like the schools of Chinese thought appeared on the scene almost simultaneously. They developed through mutual criticisms by attempting to be self-consistent and comprehensive. Such developments took place during the course of centuries, each great thinker of the school contributing his own by bridging the lacunae. Lacunae. That's a new word for me. Bridging the lacunae of the argument and expanding it over areas not yet covered. But he would not claim the founding of a new school. On the contrary, he would attribute his own development to the original founder himself, saying that they were meant by the founder. This way of philosophical development resulted in canceling the distinction between schools and systems. Generally, the word school means a number of systems built up by thinkers agreeing on some basic principles. And such thinkers may live simultaneously or at different times, but differ from one another when the detailed structures of their systems are compared. But the followers of any school in India tend to claim that they only expand the system of the founder, with the result that the difference between school and system vanishes. However, we can discover the differences, the importance of which is generally minimized by the followers. The method of expanding the original system lies in writing commentaries of the original text and gives the impression that the commentary is only an exposition. So what is he trying to get at here? I think or what do I get out of it? Or how do I understand it? I think, as for example, when we were reading earlier about Heidegger, we were reading about Heidegger, and I know a little bit, very little about Heidegger, and the book that he's known for, the book on instead of knowing and being, he wrote a book called Being and Time. And so in the case of Heidegger, as I would say typical, I would say that you could use him as an example to compare the difference between European philosophies and Indian philosophies. You could say that Heidegger, he does acknowledge his teacher Husserl in the beginning of the book, Being and Time. So he acknowledges his teacher, but he wants, it seems like European philosophers, they want to kind of make a name for themselves and kind of it's as if they're trying to patent a system of thought. So they acknowledge their teachers, but they go on to say, okay, I am I am, you could say, they're suggesting that I have followed the teachings of my teacher enough, and I've mastered them enough, and that I want to develop my own system, which will be different from my teachers, so that my system will be so different from my teacher system that they're independent. And so now my system is should be valued on its own, should become independent of my teacher. So now we have formed two different schools, two different philosophies. My teacher's, Husserl, and mine, Martin Heidegger, has my own system. Yes, you may recognize, you may even suggest that I am indebted to Husserl, but I have gone beyond Husserl. I have gone so far beyond that now you readers can forget about Husserl and just, you'll find my system is complete and different. You don't need to use Husserl to understand my philosophy, because I've created a new system. So, although yes, it may have some foundations that were brought up by Husserl, but now my system can be on its own feet. That's just an example. I'm not saying that that's exactly what Martin Heidegger would have said, but I get the impression that maybe there was more of a competition in European philosophy to come up with your own thing to make you famous. So you have all these schools, and you might have the philosophy of Martin Heidegger, the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. So you have the philosophy this and that guy. So maybe you might have somewhat of a lineage there. Okay, so this guy, I wouldn't say got his ideas, but grew out of this other guy, or is dealing with the same issues as this other guy, but he has come up with novel solutions to the same problem. So it seems like European philosophers were very concerned with coming up with novel ideas. And even though maybe they got their ideas from ancient people like the Greeks, and maybe delve into Indian philosophers, but not Indian philosophers as particular people, but Indian philosophical systems. So what this author of the book Structural Depths of Indian Thought, what he's trying to say here is that in Indian philosophies, it seems like they they tried to remain somewhat humble, or they weren't trying to come up with something new as much as expand it. Oh, and if they did come up with something new, they would say, well, it's not really new. It it was based on the founder or on my teacher, and I'm just expounding on the ideas, maybe fleshing out the details more. The structure may have been formed with my teacher and the way I was taught, and my teacher was simply almost not repeating what his teacher taught him, but was bringing up the same ideas, the same system. He was just preserving the same system and maybe expounding on it. That means that the Indian philosophers were normally not concerned with coming up with novel ideas. They were more concerned with explaining the old ideas because they saw all the old ideas as eternal, as perennial, as you couldn't get anything better than that. And so what they would write was just expound, as in bring up more detail, like as if taking the template of a particular system that came from maybe from a lineage, and they're simply repeating it and maybe bringing up more details. So maybe that prevented some innovation. Although maybe perhaps if they did have any innovation, they didn't brag about it. They said, oh, that's not really innovation. That's what my teacher would have said. So I'll give my teacher credit to any innovation that I bring up. So that's what I gather from what I've read from this book, that as a way to distinguish European philosophy from Indian philosophies, that Indian philosophies, well, they might have schools or traditions, and maybe those schools and traditions did evolve, but they were careful not to imply or attempt to get credit for they for gain credit for innovating. They would instead give all the credit to their teachers and simply say whatever innovation that I may produce, it's all because of my teachers, my lineage. It was maybe not an innovation on my part, but it was maybe something that was in the seeds of what my teacher gave me, and it just kind of evolved. It kind of grew. So in other words, so in other words, the system of thought kind of stays the same over centuries. Or if it does evolve, they don't think of it as having evolved. they would say, "Oh, our founder would have taught that," or or maybe our founder did teach that, but taught it telepathically to all his followers. And it's just now that we're bringing it up. So, well, I found it finally.
So this was the quest. And when you try to do this, inevitably you become interested in what is the
could you both shed light on your personal experiences and reflections that directed you towards your current philosophical and scientific perspective?
So I'm Swami Saravapriyananda, and I'm a monk, a Hindu monk, and I belong to this particular Hindu order called the Ramakrishna Order of Monks. We broadly belong to a philosophy called Advaita Vedanta. That would be the umbrella of philosophy for us. Personal journey, I grew up in a small town on the east coast of India, near the Bay of Bengal. This is a town called Bhubaneswar. It's an ancient city called the City of Temples. My parents were spiritual seekers, two, three generations, grandparents, and my parents also. So we had lots of books, especially books by Swami Vivekananda, and I think I'm probably the last generation before cable TV and internet, and also all we had were books. So I grew up reading lots of books, a bit of a bookworm. And what appealed to me was this message that that spirituality is real and it is experiential. One can experience it firsthand. And that is actually the purpose of life, uh, spiritual enlightenment. And that really evoked something in me. And I decided that's what I'm going to do all my life. And I found out about being a monk afterwards. And I became a monk after I finished my education. Um, so we'll talk about the philosophy behind it as we go along. Uh, but yes, this was the project. And I've been a monk for about 30 years now. And I guess I've refined my philosophical perspective over these decades.
Great, very, very interesting. Well, so I grew up in Southern California, and my dad had a master's degree in chemistry and worked in tech industries for a while. My mom had a bachelor's in biology, and was quite sharp. And my dad eventually became a minister in a fundamentalist Christian group, and it was quite striking. I mean, it was very, very strong that even other Christian groups were wrong, and it was very much we're right and everybody else is wrong, and Catholics certainly weren't going to make it to heaven, that kind of thing. And so I got that on weekends and Wednesday nights, because we also did Wednesday nights at the church. And but during the week, I got science at school that was suggesting a very different point of view. And so I, as a teenager, decided I wanted to answer the question, are we just machines? That was how I put the question to myself. It seemed like from a scientific point of view, we could say we were just machines. From the religious point of view in which I was being raised in, not. And so I wanted to find out what was going on there. And the science could do stuff. It could make technology, and the religion did.
Well, friends, now is a good point to end this session, because I've already got an hour and 43 minutes.